Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today, we're going to be talking about a concept called soft power and how important it is for virtually every country in the world to exert this type of power. My guest today is an expert on this topic. Dr. Irene S. Wu is the author of Measuring Soft Power in International Relations. She's a lecturer in the Communications, Culture, and Technology program at Georgetown University, and she's a former fellow at the Wilson Center for International Scholars. Dr. Wu, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being with me today. Thank you so much.
It's great to be here.
Great. Well, you got a long website, so we'll just put that up on the screen and people can take a look at it and learn much more about soft power. But your book is so timely, and let's just jump right into it. Why did you write this book, Measuring Soft Power in International Relations?
Yes. Well, as you know, soft power is a country's ability to influence others via persuasion and with the goal of cooperation. And really, the way it works is when countries, when foreigners have a high regard for a country, or they have a high respect for what it does and for its values, then they're more willing to work with that country. And that's that kind of influence we talk about as soft power. But it is a very intangible sort of political power, and it hasn't. There is not a consensus in international relations studies world of how to measure it. And I thought it would be great to develop a way to measure it so that it is easier to see if it's growing or waning or how it's developing. And also, it's quite frankly easier to commit time and resources to something when you can measure it. Because other kinds of economic power, like other kinds of power, like economic power or military power, we do have ways of measuring it, and we look at how many soldiers you have, or how much equipment you have, or how many military bases you have, and then you can compare a country's military power. And economic power, we typically use GDP, gross domestic product, and that was really the basis for my developing the soft power rubric, which is how I measure soft power.
I see. So basically, we could say soft power would be anything like a development program, like the USAID program until it
Mhm.
was eliminated not long ago, or the
Mhm.
US Peace Corps,
Mhm.
or maybe even trade programs, that type
Mhm.
of thing. And then the hard power would be primarily military programs, or is it just 95% military, or others
Yeah,
at a
yeah,
hard power?
I think you're definitely on the right track. I usually think of hard power as coercive. So coercive, often violent, and you're right. So military power is usually the way you think of it. But sometimes even economic power, like economic sanctions, like we have the United States has economic sanctions on Russia. That is a kind of coercive hard power as well. But soft power, I think of as persuasion, and
Mhm.
persuasion is usually um, finding ways to for foreigners to think of your country as attractive. And you usually think of culture, you usually think of sport, you usually think of education as kinds of classic ways of fostering soft power. But also, if a military is providing assistance during a disaster, that's an opportunity to develop a soft power. Also, economic aid, right? Development aid, or even international trade, where people get a chance to work with each other.
Exactly. That's very true. Yes, that is exactly true. And the soft power,
I think it's the people to. Oh, I think there was a little bit of a blip there, and I missed your question.
no problem. I was just commenting on soft power.
Uh-huh.
We run into these freeze frames periodically, but I think the that's a good way to put it.
Hmm.
And soft power is much less bellicose. It's,
Hmm.
I would say, much less expensive than hard power. We look at our military budget, almost $1 trillion now. You
Mhm.
look at the amount of money, let's just take the US, for example, that
Mhm.
we're investing in soft power.
Mhm.
It's nothing, like our assistance, overseas assistance, like under 1%
Mhm.
of the budget, which is way down. And
Mhm.
but how do people view this in the United States? So we don't have a good picture, in my opinion, because I know the University of Maryland, right
Mhm.
down the road from where you are,
Mhm.
years ago did a study and asked Americans, said, how much should we be putting into soft power like the AID programs?
Yeah.
And they said something like, oh, no more than 15, 20%. And many of the people said we're already putting 25% in, which we're not. We're not even close. It's under 1% of
Yeah.
our total budget. But how do we get these mythical notions and these really false notions about how much we're spending on overseas assistance, which is totally wrong?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think people see the results of that kind of spending, and the results are really great and they're really spectacular. So they mistakenly assume it's a huge amount of the US government budget. But actually, it's an example of how a little can go a long way. And especially if you offer assistance and expertise and aid in a smart, effective way, then really it not only produces it produces great results in the country to country relationship, in addition to being very effective project on the ground. So one of the most effective programs that has been studied in terms of soft power is PEPFAR, which was started under President George W. Bush,
Mhm.
Republican president, and that was for supporting aid from the United States to countries in Africa for HIV prevention and treatment. And it was tremendously successful, and in terms of the amount of money spent, it was hugely effective. And I think the studies that have been done on that program show that where PEPFAR was operating, the opinion of the United States was very high. And when public opinion of the United States is very high, I also have summaries in my book, Measuring Soft Power in International Relations. I have colleagues who went out and measured that, if foreign public opinion of the United States is high, then when we need help in going to war, when we need help in setting up sanctions, those countries are more willing to step up and help us because they've had good experience working with the United States. So I think that's really, how soft power is important.
That's very true. And that anti-HIV program was very successful. I'm not sure if they brought it back online, but we did one of the first programs that this Doge bunch eliminated was USAID,
Yeah,
Agency for International Development,
yeah,
which their budget is something like 2 cents on every $100
right,
that is spent on this.
right.
And the immense amount of goodwill that we got off of it was just incalculable. And now we have basically shut down that program, eliminated it. And so you can see it too in many ways in that the approval ratings for the United States have fallen under the Biden administration. They were at 70, 80%. Now they're down to 25,
I haven't.
30%. So we've really lost ground as far as people admiring this country. But what are some of the other advantages AID programs could provide?
Well, I think that um, fundamentally, what is the foundation for soft power is when you have people to people exchanges. So when foreigners from other countries have a chance to interact, work with Americans face to face or mediated over communications. But I think that is really the key to soft power. And of course, aid programs are one way to provide that avenue for interaction between foreigners and Americans. And when you look at what I did in my book in terms of measuring soft power, I picked four types of interactions that foreigners have that show that they're interested in another country. One, they can watch a movie, which is really easy. Two, they can go visit, which is a bigger investment. And three, they can actually go to school, go to university in a foreign country, which is a big time commitment and huge resource commitment. But if they're really attracted and interested in what's going on in another country, they'll do it. And fourth, the ultimate commitment would be to actually immigrate to that country. So if you look at this data, as I did, and I started looking at data from 1960 to 2020, you can see, the relationships, the people-to-people relationships between countries, and you can really start to measure: is there change? Is there growth? Is there decline? And it's country to country, and you can look at sets of countries, and really aid is one of those important venues where you can build these people-to-people relationships, and it's not just a one-time thing. Over decades, people get to know each other, and it can be aid for these 5 years, and then the next 5 years it can be political, and the next 5 years it can just be personal. But these are the kinds of human relationships that I think are the rock foundation of soft power.
Exactly. And this was recognized decades ago. President Eisenhower
Mm.
created this Sister Cities program, the Atoms for Peace program. You had John F. Kennedy created the United States Peace Corps. And we're going to come back and talk about all of these different activities in just a moment. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or a community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a podcast, or you just have a computer, you like our shows and you'd like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're taking a look at a very important concept, and that is soft power. My guest is an expert on this topic. Dr. Irene Wu is the author of Measuring Soft Power in International Relations. You've really summarized this very nicely about how we can, all of us can play a role to some degree in projecting soft power, and we can be the beneficiaries of this soft power also. But now you mentioned that for some reason, when I think of, to digress a moment, when I think of soft power, I always think of your colleague who just passed away recently, I think Dr. Joseph Nye. And he was sort of the grandfather of soft power, I guess. You'd have to bring me up to date on that. But it was an important concept. And we are not, in my opinion, paying enough attention to this in this country, and many other countries aren't too. And it's a lot, as you mentioned, a lot cheaper, more effective, less devastation, destruction, deaths on across the board to exert soft power than hard power. But you mentioned your new book. You've been able to capture how to measure this. How does your scale work on this, or how do you do that?
So basically, I look at three of the four elements of the soft power rubric that I mentioned earlier. So the three elements that there is United Nations data and also national data from 1960 to the present. And so you can look at the number of immigrants in a country and which countries that they're from. You can look at the number of international students and which countries they're from. And you can look at the number of international visitors that and which countries that they come from. And basically that enables you to create a map of, if the United States, we have a lot of immigrants from these 4 dozen countries, and most of them are from, these top 5 countries. And you can really get a sense for where these people-to-people relationships are, and you can get a sense for looking at, over time, where they're going. So, for example, we often talk about an economic power, right? That we have important international trade partners. Well, who are the important international soft power relationships for the United States? If you look at the numbers for the last 10 years, between the US and Canada, that's about 11% of these people-to-people relationships counted in these three series are from Canada. So for the United States, looking at the numbers from people coming from Mexico, it's about 16%. So these are pretty big numbers. These are our big soft power relationships. And that's what the beauty of the soft power rubric is. I've made it very, very simple, and all the data is public and it's all printed up in the book. And if you look at it, there are no secrets there. Everything is transparent. It's an academic book. And you can start to quantify just to get an indication of what that relationship is. Because heretofore, we've just sort of known that these are important relationships. We know that we have a very important relationship with Great Britain and with France and with Japan. But how much? How much? And is it, more importantly, is it getting better? Or do we need to, pay a little bit more attention to it? That's what these indicators can be useful for.
They certainly can, and
Mhm.
vital to help us use them as sort of benchmarks as to how to move in the future. I'm just curious. Every country, I'm sure, has soft power programs. It doesn't matter. North Korea, it doesn't matter. They all have some soft power program. But are there certain countries that rise to the top that rely more on soft power than hard power? And I'm thinking of
Sure.
maybe a country like Costa Rica that doesn't have a standing army, as I recall, some other like the Scandinavian countries that have relied more so on cooperation, working through the UN, a variety of approaches. Like until recently, we've had all this saber rattling, bellicose activity. But are there certain countries that really come to the top, and then you have other countries that maybe things aren't going well, like Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine or that type of thing?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think a really good example is South Africa. So South Africa plays a big role in international relations. Frequently, when you've got, a global meeting, if you only have a couple of seats for each region, South Africa is going to be in one of those seats for the African continent, right? And, why is that? Well, first of all, at a very practical level, it's a very open country. So, in terms of the number of immigrants, the number of foreign students it attracts, that's why, at least in the soft power rubric, it comes up high. But the fundamental reason is because of its moral standing, right? This is a country that suffered under apartheid for so long and has managed to overcome it in a largely peaceful way. Made this transition, and I think that makes it a leader. It's a moral standing issue, and every country, South Africa has a lot of problems today, as every country does, but on balance, it's very highly regarded. So there are countries like that because of their history have quite a lot of soft power, much more soft power than if you look at the size of their economy or the size of their military. Another kind of example is Spain. Right, Spain is a country that is a leader in a lot of areas, and it's really because it's so open, and a lot of people know Spain because they've been there. So it's and so that's one of those really personal ties. People know that country, so they're going to have some regard for it. And if you're closed like North Korea, then it's just going to be hard because nobody knows any North Koreans. We've never had the opportunity. We really never have the opportunity to go there, and they don't have the opportunity to come out either. So it's very difficult to have a personal connection to that country. It's everything in that political relationship is going to be an abstraction. So that's a
Certainly is.
contrast.
Yes. It's one of the countries that seems is one of the countries that's really moving forward quickly since the United States is becoming introverted and looking inward and
Mhm.
really ceding its leadership role around the world. Come right down to it. We've basically, over the last 7 months, ceded our leadership to China.
Mhm.
China, in the eyes of many of the international experts, is the number one country in the world today. But
Mhm.
I'm thinking back many years ago, China had the Belt and Road Project.
Mhm.
That would have been the ultimate type of soft power, would it not have been?
Yeah, I think the China story is a very interesting one because definitely they have had. If you look back several decades, they've had a huge growth in soft power because in if you think back to 1970, it was a completely closed country, right? Foreigners really, you couldn't go in as a normal visitor or as a normal tourist. You couldn't, it wasn't easy to go study there. And people from China didn't have an easy time coming out. So this is a situation where if you compare and contrast that with today, there's a huge number of international visitors that go to China. There are quite a lot of students that go to China to study. Maybe not so many from the United States, although more than there used to be, but especially from Southeast Asia and from other parts of the world, from Korea. There are a lot of students that go there to China, and so that is, I think of that as the foundation to their soft power. Now, with the Belt and Road, the interesting thing there is that it's kind of in terms of soft power, at least the research that has been done so far, it's kind of a mixed bag because on the one hand, the economic aid can be very, very welcome, right? And I think China has gone into places that other uh, um, big pocketed countries have not. So, that's a real
especially African
help.
countries,
Yeah,
right?
help is always welcome. But then, it's not easy to be a good aid donor. And every once in a while you hear problems that, the way that the local community didn't like the way the project was run. Well, we've heard a lot of that of the United States too. So so
That's
it's a
very
difficult
true.
thing. Economic, a good implementation of economic aid is not an easy thing to do. So we should be
Mhm.
proud of PEPFAR because that was a good one.
Exactly right.
Right.
Yes. And
Yeah.
we have given away our leadership role in this international goodwill program. But you were talking about that one of the quickest ways to alienate people in a particular country is send in your military. It happens every time that I've seen it anyway. It has literally turned the country off and alienates the people against that particular country where the military came in. Now, there are a few people who might like it, but it does not achieve the intended effect that they wanted to in many cases. So that's been a problem. Before we run out of time, one thing I wanted to run in check very quickly. One organization that's so critical to everybody in the whole world is the United Nations. When I think about the
Hmm.
United Nations, you've got the World Health Organization combating
Yeah.
diseases. You've got the refugee program helping 120 million
Yes.
refugees. You've got the UN agencies helping to move aircraft, ships, mail, weather information around the world. And
Yeah.
about the only part of the United Nations system that I can think of that might be a little bit hard power would be peacekeeping. But that's a mixed bag too, because peacekeepers go in, they don't go in to fight, they go in to
Mhm.
separate and to
Right.
maintain the peace. So
Right.
really, that's a sort of a combination, a little bit of hard and a whole lot of soft power. Do
Mhm.
you see
Mhm.
it? Do you see it that way?
Yes, definitely. And I think, it's easy to criticize the United Nations because so often there are big problems that they can't solve. But it's, I think,
Right.
important to remember that the day-to-day work of the United Nations just keeps going. And that doesn't get into the news. But the data that I used for my research comes from the United Nations. That is very, very hard work collecting that data and, helping refugees when we know people need help. The UN is organized to help them, to help children, to focus on health. And these are things where it's really important for experts from all over the world and ordinary people from all over the world to be accustomed to working with the United Nations to getting things done. And when you work with an organization, you work with people for a while, you have these relationships, you trust them. If you trust them, then you can achieve big things, and that's really what soft power is about. And so, even though there are ups and downs in a country's soft power, I do believe that it's really civil society that matters. So, how we in the United States, how we treat immigrants, in each of us individually, how we work with international students, how we treat international visitors. When you have the chance, do a good thing, and it adds up over time. And you never know who you might be helping out. They might be able to help us out sometime in the future.
Exactly. They have been instrumental, and this abrogation of our soft power leadership
Mhm.
has damaged us immensely. Well, in the last 30 seconds we have, is there some message that we need to take away from your book other than go buy a copy? But what can we do? What should we do to learn more about soft power?
I think it's just important for us all to be aware and not be too worried if foreign public opinion is plunging because of particular policy decisions. These policy decisions come and go, and I think people all over the world understand that. And the United States has always been very open to foreigners, and I hope that we continue to be that way. And we're going through an adjustment now, but I think in the long term we will return to our usual course, our usual way of doing things, and maybe with new systems, maybe with new rules. But I think we should have confidence in ourselves.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Irene Wu, it's an
Uh,
extremely important concept that so many of us need to learn a lot more about. I want to thank you so much for a very interesting and a very important discussion.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.